At 00:47 hours on May 17, 1943, Flight Lieutenant John "Hoppy" Hopgood stood at the controls of Lancaster ED-925 watching the surface of the Moona Dam Reservoir rush toward him at 240 miles per hour. The altimeter read exactly 60 feet. Any lower and his bomber would hit the water. Any higher and the cylindrical weapon spinning backward in his bomb bay would skip over the dam wall instead of sinking against it. Hopgood's flight engineer called the altitude 60 feet 60. The wireless operator watched for flak tracers from German gun positions on the dam towers. The bomb aimer lay prone in the nose-eye pressed to the Mark 14th bomb sight, thumb on the release button, waiting for the moment when two wooden dowels mounted on the nose lined up perfectly with the towers 400 yards apart. Behind Hopgood, 7 more Lancasters orbited at 1,000 feet, waiting their turn to attack. Wing Commander Guy Gibson had just made the first run, releasing his bouncing bomb that detonated against the dam wall with a massive explosion, but failed to breach the structure. Now it was Hopgood's turn. The second attack of Operation Chastise, the most audacious bombing raid of World War II. At 00:48 hours, German flak gunners on the North Tower opened fire. Tracer rounds arced toward ED-925. Hopgood held course steady at 60 feet 240 miles per hour. The Lancaster shuddered as 20mm shells ripped through the fuselage. The port inner engine caught fire. Flames streamed back along the wing. The bomb aimer shouted, "Bomb gone!" and the spinning cylinder dropped into the water 6 seconds late, bouncing twice before sailing over the dam wall and exploding in the power station below. Hopgood pulled up hard, trying to gain altitude on 3 engines with the 4th burning. At 500 feet, the fuel tank exploded. ED-925 broke apart in the air. 3 crew members parachuted to safety and were captured. Hopgood and 4 others died in the wreckage. His Lancaster serial number, ED-925, had been built 7 months earlier at Metropolitan Vickers in Manchester, one of 7 307th Lancasters that would be produced during the war. She had flown 13 operations before this night. She would fly no more. But behind her, 6 more Lancasters pressed their attacks, and 150 miles east, another wave of Lancasters was approaching the Eder Dam. And across the Ruhr Valley, 500 miles of German territory, dozens more Lancasters were bombing cities, marshalling yards, and industrial targets. Because this was what Lancasters did every night, they carried the war to Germany when nothing else could. The story of the Lancaster began with failure, frustration, and a designer who refused to accept that his original concept was wrong. Roy Chadwick, chief designer at A.V. Rowe & Company in Manchester, had created the Avro Manchester, a twin-engine heavy bomber that entered service with RAF Bomber Command in November 1940. The Manchester was a disaster. Powered by 2 Rolls-Royce Vulture 24-cylinder engines producing 1,760 horsepower each, the Manchester was chronically underpowered and mechanically unreliable. The Vulture engines overheated, leaked coolant, and suffered connecting rod failures. Manchester crews reported engine failures on nearly every operation. Fully loaded, the bomber could barely reach 15,000 feet. Range was inadequate. Performance was dismal. By mid-1941, it was clear the Manchester was a failure. Production was cancelled after only 200 aircraft. But Chadwick recognized that the Manchester's basic airframe design was sound. The problem was the engines. If the Vulture engines were replaced with 4 reliable engines, the design might succeed. Chadwick proposed a radical modification: extend the Manchester's wingspan from 90 feet to 102 feet and install 4 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines in place of 2 Vultures. The Merlin was the most reliable aero engine in Britain, proven in Spitfires and Hurricanes. 4 Merlins would provide 800 horsepower total, nearly triple the Manchester's unreliable power. The Air Ministry was skeptical. Converting a failed twin-engine bomber to a 4-engine configuration seemed desperate, but Britain desperately needed heavy bombers. The short Stirling and Handley Page Halifax were in production, but neither could carry bomb loads adequate for destroying German industry. Chadwick's proposal offered a quick solution using existing manufacturing facilities. Approval came in July 1940. The first prototype, designated Avro Type 683 Lancaster, flew on January 9, 1941. Chief Test Pilot Sam Brown reported that the aircraft handled beautifully far better than the Manchester despite being heavier. The four Merlins provided ample power. The bomber reached 20,000 feet easily and maintained stable flight at all speeds. Production was authorized immediately. The first production, Lancaster Serial L7527, was delivered to No. 44 Squadron on Christmas Eve, 1941. Operational trials began in January 1942. On March 3, 1942, 4 Lancasters from 44 Squadron conducted their first operation, laying mines in the Heligoland Bight. The aircraft performed flawlessly. 3 days later, Lancasters bombed the Renault factory at Billancourt near Paris in the first Lancaster bombing raid. The Lancaster was a 4-engine heavy bomber with a crew of 7 pilot, flight engineer, navigator, bomb aimer, wireless operator, mid-upper gunner, and rear gunner. The aircraft was 69 feet long with a 102-foot wingspan. Empty weight was 36,900 pounds. Maximum loaded weight was 68,000 pounds for normal operations, though Lancasters regularly flew at 70,000 to 72,000 pounds on special operations. 4 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, either Merlin XX22 or 24 series each, producing 280 to 640 horsepower, depending on variant, drove 3-blade constant-speed propellers. Maximum speed was 287 miles per hour at 11,500 feet. Cruising speed was 200 miles per hour. Service ceiling was 24,500 feet. Range was 2,530 miles with a 7,000-pound bomb load, or 1,660 miles with maximum bomb load. The defining feature of the Lancaster was its cavernous bomb bay. At 33 feet long and unobstructed by structural members, the Lancaster's bomb bay could carry a greater variety of weapons than any other bomber in the war. Standard load was 14,000 pounds of bombs. Modified Lancasters carried the 22,000-pound Grand Slam, the heaviest bomb used operationally by any Air Force. Defensive armament consisted of 8 303-inch Browning machine guns in 3 turrets, 2 guns in the nose turret, 2 in the dorsal turret, and 4 in the tail turret. Later variants replaced the nose turret with a single flexible gun and upgraded the dorsal turret to 2 .50 caliber machine guns. The armament was adequate but not exceptional. Lancasters relied on darkness, electronic countermeasures, and tactical formations for protection. The cockpit seated the pilot and flight engineer side by side. The pilot flew from the left seat with throttles, control column, rudder pedals, and primary instruments. The flight engineer sat on the right, monitoring engine instruments, fuel gauges, and hydraulic systems. During bombing runs, the flight engineer controlled engine power while the pilot concentrated on maintaining altitude and heading. Behind the cockpit, the navigator worked at a table with maps, charts, and navigation instruments. The G navigation system, introduced in 1942, allowed navigators to fix position within a few miles using radio signals from ground stations in Britain. The H-2S ground mapping radar, introduced in 1943, provided crude images of terrain below, allowing navigation through clouds. The bomb aimer occupied the nose compartment, lying prone on a padded rest with the Mark 13th bomb sight between his eyes. The bomb sight was a vector computing device that calculated bomb trajectory based on altitude, airspeed, wind, and bomb ballistics. During the final bombing run, the bomb aimer directed the pilot, left steady, right a bit steady, steady, bombs gone. The wireless operator sat amidships, operating radios and monitoring distress frequencies. During combat, he assisted the gunners by watching for attacking fighters and calling evasive maneuvers. The mid-upper gunner stood in a powered turret amidships, scanning the sky above and to the sides. The rear gunner sat in the tail turret, the coldest and most exposed position, watching the darkness behind for attacking fighters. Lancaster crews bonded intensely. 7 men living together, flying together, facing death together for 30 operations, created bonds stronger than family. They knew each other's voices, habits, fears. They trusted each other absolutely because survival depended on every man performing perfectly. When one crew member was lost, the entire crew grieved. The first major Lancaster operation came on April 17, 1942, when 12 Lancasters from 44 and 97 squadrons joined a force of 200 bombers attacking the M1 diesel engine factory at Augsburg in southern Germany. The raid was conducted in daylight at low altitude to achieve surprise and accuracy. It failed catastrophically. German fighters intercepted the Lancasters 50 miles from the target. Without fighter escort, the bombers were defenseless. 4 Lancasters were shot down before reaching Augsburg. 3 more were shot down after bombing. Of 12 Lancasters dispatched, 7 were lost, a 58% loss rate that was unsustainable. The raid proved that daylight bombing without fighter escort was suicide. RAF Bomber Command shifted Lancaster operations entirely to night bombing. The Lancaster's performance at night was excellent. Its 4 reliable engines, long range, and heavy bomb load made it ideal for strategic bombing. By mid-1942, Lancasters were the primary equipment for Bomber Command's main force squadrons. On May 30-31, 1942, Bomber Command launched Operation Millennium, the first 1,000-bomber raid. 1 ORO-46 bombers attacked Cologne, overwhelming German defenses through sheer numbers. Lancasters formed the core of the attack, dropping 455 tons of bombs. The raid destroyed 600 acres of Cologne's city center and killed 469 people. The psychological impact on Germany was enormous. The 1,000-bomber raids demonstrated that Bomber Command could strike deep into Germany despite fighter and flak defenses. But the raids also revealed limitations in navigation and bomb aiming. Bombers scattered over dozens of square miles. Bombs fell across the city rather than on specific targets. Accuracy was measured in miles, not yards. To improve accuracy, Bomber Command formed the Pathfinder Force in August 1942. Pathfinder crews, the most experienced navigators and bomb aimers, would mark targets with colored flares. Main force bombers would aim at the markers rather than trying to identify targets individually. The Lancaster equipped most Pathfinder squadrons because its performance and reliability exceeded other bombers. The introduction of Pathfinders and electronic navigation aids improved accuracy significantly. The raid on Hamburg from July 24 to August 3, 1943 demonstrated what massed Lancasters could achieve. 4 raids dropped 9,000 tons of bombs on Hamburg, creating firestorms that killed 42,000 people and destroyed 250,000 homes. The Hamburg firestorm demonstrated that incendiary bombing could achieve destruction beyond anything high-explosive bombs could produce. But Hamburg also demonstrated German defensive capabilities. Bomber Command lost 87 aircraft during the 4 Hamburg raids, including 53 Lancasters. German night fighters equipped with radar could intercept bombers despite darkness. Flak batteries guided by radar could shoot down aircraft at 20,000 feet. German defenses killed hundreds of airmen every night. The survival rate for Lancaster crews was appalling. Operational losses averaged 3% to 5% per raid. With 30 operations required to complete a tour, simple mathematics showed that fewer than 25% of crews would survive. Some squadrons lost 50% of their aircraft in a single night. New crews arriving at squadrons in 1943 had a 50-50 chance of dying within 3 months. The psychological strain was overwhelming. Crews watched friends die in burning aircraft. They saw bombers explode beside them, knowing 7 men just died. They flew through flak so dense it seemed impossible to survive. They fought German night fighters in running battles that lasted until fuel or ammunition ran out, and they returned to base, slept a few hours, and flew again the next night. Some men broke under the strain. They refused to fly, were classified as lacking moral fiber, stripped of rank, and discharged in disgrace. But most kept flying. They developed superstitions, rituals, lucky charms. They relied on crew bonds, dark humor, and denial. They focused on the mission, the next target, getting through tonight. Thinking about 30 operations was impossible. Thinking about 1 operation was manageable. The Lancasters' greatest single operation came on May 16-17, 1943 with Operation Chastise, the raid on the Ruhr Dams. Wing Commander Guy Gibson formed No. 617 Squadron specifically for the mission, selecting the best crews from existing squadrons. The target was 3 dams, Muna, Eder, and Sorpa. Destroying the dams would flood the Ruhr Valley, disrupt industry, and demonstrate British resolve. The weapon was Barnes-Wallace's bouncing bomb, officially called Upkeep, a cylindrical weapon weighing 250 pounds that would be spun backward at 500 RPM before release. When dropped at exactly 60 feet altitude and 240 miles per hour, the spinning cylinder would skip across the water like a stone, clear the torpedo nets protecting the dams, sink against the dam wall, and detonate at 30 feet depth. The hydrostatic pressure wave would crack the dam. 19 Lancasters, specially modified to carry Upkeep, took off from RAF Scampton on the night of May 16th. They flew at 100 feet across the North Sea and into Germany to avoid radar detection. Navigation had to be perfect. Timing had to be exact. The approach to each dam required flying 60 feet above water at 240 miles per hour between gun towers that would fire point blank. Gibson's aircraft attacked Muna Dam first at Soruo 28 hours. His bouncing bomb detonated perfectly against the dam wall but did not breach it. Hopgood attacked second at Soruo 48 hours and was shot down. Flight Lieutenant Mick Martin attacked third. His bomb overshot. Flight Lieutenant Dingy Young attacked fourth. His bomb hit perfectly. The dam still held. Flight Lieutenant David Maltby attacked fifth at Soruo 49 hours. His bomb struck the dam wall and detonated. The accumulated damage from 3 perfect hits caused a breach. The dam wall collapsed, and 140 million cubic meters of water poured into the valley below. Towns were flooded, factories were inundated, power stations were destroyed. The Muna was breached. Gibson led 5 aircraft to the Eater Dam 50 miles east. The Eater was more difficult to attack because the approach required flying through a valley over a spit of land, then descending sharply to the water. Flight Lieutenant David Shannon made 3 attempts but couldn't line up properly. Flight Lieutenant Les Munro made several passes. Finally, Flight Lieutenant Henry Maudslay got his bomb away, but it hit the dam parapet and exploded prematurely, damaging his aircraft fatally. He crashed on the return flight. Shannon attacked again and hit perfectly. Flight Lieutenant Les Knight attacked next. His bomb struck the dam wall and breached it. 202 million cubic meters of water escaped, flooding the Eater Valley. 2 dams breached, 2 cities flooded, mission successful. But the cost was terrible. Of 19 Lancasters dispatched, 8 were shot down. 53 aircrew died, 3 were captured. For RAF Bomber Command, 42% losses were unsustainable even for successful operations. But Operation Chastise demonstrated what Lancasters could do with special weapons, intensive training, and desperate courage. The dam's raid made the Lancaster famous. Newspapers called it the raid of the century. The crews became heroes. Gibson received the Victoria Cross. The operation proved that precision attacks were possible with proper planning and equipment. But precision operations like Chastise were rare. Most nights, Lancasters bombed area targets through clouds with bombs scattered across square miles. By late 1943, Lancasters equipped 41 squadrons, more than half of Bomber Command's operational strength. Production reached 300 aircraft per month from factories at Manchester, Preston, and Chester in England, plus Canadian factories at Toronto and Montreal. Lancasters were being built faster than they were being lost, an industrial achievement that German aircraft production could not match. The Battle of Berlin, from November 1943 to March 1944, represented the peak of Lancaster operations. 16 major raids on Berlin dropped 20,000 tons of bombs on Germany's capital. The raids killed 10,000 people and destroyed 1/4 of Berlin's housing, but German defenses took a terrible toll. Bomber Command lost 625 aircraft during the Berlin campaign, including 402 Lancasters. 250 aircrew died. The losses were unsustainable. Loss rates in early 1944 exceeded 5% per raid. Crews completing 30 operations became statistical anomalies. Morale declined as men watched entire squadrons wiped out in months. The Berlin campaign failed to break German morale or war production. Arthur Harris, commanding Bomber Command, had promised to destroy Berlin and end the war. He achieved neither. The failure of the Berlin campaign forced Bomber Command to reconsider strategy. Deep penetration raids against heavily defended targets produced unacceptable losses. But precision raids against transportation and oil facilities could cripple German war production while reducing bomber losses. In spring 1944, Lancasters shifted to supporting the D-Day invasion by attacking railways, bridges, and coastal defenses. The results were immediate and dramatic. Loss rates dropped to 1% to 2% per operation. Accuracy improved because targets were closer and less defended. French railway systems were systematically destroyed, preventing German reinforcements from reaching Normandy. Coastal batteries that could have devastated landing forces were destroyed before D-Day. The Lancaster proved as effective in tactical operations as strategic bombing. After D-Day, Lancasters returned to strategic bombing, but with better tactics and weapons. The 12,000-pound tallboy bomb, designed by Barnes-Wallis, could penetrate 20 feet of concrete before exploding. Lancasters carrying tallboys destroyed V-weapon sites, submarine pens, and railway viaducts that conventional bombs could not damage. The 22,000-pound Grand Slam, introduced in March 1945, could penetrate 40 feet of concrete and cause earthquake effects that collapsed structures. Grand Slam operations represented the pinnacle of Lancaster capability. Only specially modified Lancasters with strengthened airframes and more powerful engines could carry the weapon. Only the most experienced crews flew Grand Slam missions. The attacks achieved precision results. The Bielefeld Viaduct collapsed. The Arnsberg Bridge was destroyed. Submarine pens at Farge were penetrated. Targets that had resisted years of bombing were destroyed by single Grand Slams. By early 1945, Germany's defenses were collapsing. Fuel shortages grounded most Luftwaffe night fighters. Flak ammunition was rationed. Bomber command losses dropped below 1% per operation. Lancasters ranged across Germany, almost unopposed, destroying cities that had survived 4 years of bombing. Dresden, Würzburg, Potsdam, all were devastated by Lancaster raids in the war's final months. The strategic bombing campaign remains controversial. Did bombing shorten the war? Did it break German morale? Were civilian casualties justified? Historians debate these questions 80 years later. But several facts are clear. Strategic bombing forced Germany to divert massive resources to air defense, diverted fighter aircraft from other fronts, and destroyed production capacity Germany could not replace. Lancaster losses were severe but not strategically significant. 249 Lancasters were lost on operations, approximately 44% of production. But 573 Lancaster crewmen died, approximately 44% of all Bomber Command aircrew who flew. Every lost Lancaster meant 7 dead or captured airmen, men who could not be replaced quickly. The human cost exceeded the material cost. After the war, most surviving Lancasters were scrapped. Of 73377 built, only 17 survive today in museums. 2 are maintained in flying condition, 1 in Britain, operated by the Battle of Britain Memorial, Flight 1 in Canada, operated by the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum. Both fly at airshows, keeping the Lancaster's memory alive for generations who never heard 4 Merlins at full power. The Lancaster's technical legacy influenced post-war bomber design. The Avro Lincoln, essentially an enlarged Lancaster, served the RAF into the 1950s. The Avro Shackleton maritime patrol aircraft used Lancaster wings and tail. The emphasis on large unobstructed bomb bays influenced B-52 and Vulcan bomber designs. The Lancaster proved that large bomb capacity mattered more than speed or defensive armament for strategic bombers. But the Lancaster's real legacy is human, not technical. It represents the 573 airmen who died flying bombing missions over Germany. It represents the courage required to climb into an aircraft knowing the odds were against survival. It represents the crews who flew 30, 40, 50 operations when most died before completing 10. It represents Bomber Command's determination to strike back when Britain stood alone against Nazi Germany. The moral questions about strategic bombing remain unresolved, but the bravery of Lancaster crews is unquestioned. They flew into flak and fighters night after night. They bombed through searchlights and fighters. They brought crippled aircraft home on 2 engines with wounded crew and missing tail sections. They did what their nation asked, despite knowing the cost. Guy Gibson, who led the Dams raid, died in September 1944 when his Mosquito crashed on return from an operation. He had completed 3 tours, flown 174 operations, and won the Victoria Cross. He was 26 years old. Leonard Cheshire, who perfected low-level marking techniques, survived the war and received the Victoria Cross. He spent the rest of his life working with disabled people, founding dozens of homes for those in need. Most Lancaster crewmen were not famous. They were 19- and 20-year-olds from Britain, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Poland, Czechoslovakia, and other countries. They volunteered for aircrew, trained for months, crewed up with 6 strangers who became brothers and flew into darkness over Germany. Half died before completing their tours. The survivors carried memories that haunted them for decades. The Lancaster enabled RAF Bomber Command to strike Germany when no other force could. From 1942 to 1945, when Soviet forces were grinding toward Berlin from the east and American forces were fighting across France from the west, Lancasters bombed Germany every night. The campaign cost 55,000 airmen's lives and accomplished strategic objectives that remain debated. But it demonstrated that Britain would not surrender, would not accept Nazi domination, would fight until Germany was defeated. That determination, that refusal to quit, defines the Lancaster's legacy more than any technical specification. The aircraft was good but not exceptional by late war standards. American B-29s were faster carried, heavier loads, flew higher. But no bomber in World War II carried the war to the enemy more consistently, more relentlessly, more determinedly than the Lancaster. On the night of May 16, 1943, when Flight Lieutenant Hopgood pressed his attack on the Moona Dam, despite being hit by flak, despite his aircraft burning, despite knowing he would probably die, he demonstrated what Lancaster crews did every night. They completed their missions regardless of cost. They bombed their targets regardless of defenses. They kept flying into the darkness because that was what the mission required. Hopgood's Lancaster ED-925 disintegrated at 500 feet over the Moona Reservoir. His bomb aimer, Flying Officer Gregory, escaped by parachute but drowned in the reservoir. His rear gunner, Pilot Officer Bircher, parachuted safely and was captured. Hopgood and 4 others died in the crash. The bomber burned on the hillside below the dam for 3 days, marking the spot where 7 men gave everything for a mission most considered impossible. That was the Lancaster's story. Not just the aircraft, the metal engines and bombs, but the men who flew her. They knew the odds. They flew anyway. They understood the mission. They completed it anyway. They watched friends die. They kept flying anyway. That is why the Lancaster matters, not because it was the best bomber, but because it represented the best of the men who flew it: courage, determination, and sacrifice. The aircraft was a tool. The men were heroes. Together they changed the war and defined an era when Britain's survival depended on men willing to fly into the night and keep flying no matter what darkness brought.